Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down, run them down.
Alrighty, hello there folks. Hey, we're back today again talking about Daniel Holtzclaw. So you guys may have been coming off of watching the videos, the part 1 and 2 about Carla Raines, and seeing all of the very useful information that was gleaned from that interview. Like you hear Brian Bates in that episode, the way he's talking about it took him to get to her interview before he could understand all the things that he was seeing happening in this investigation. He couldn't understand why so many women were saying that they were asked to expose themselves. There were certain things that he just couldn't understand the mechanics of how it was all, why it was happening, the probabilities of it. He just didn't understand until he got to Carla's interview, where he finds out that the clasp and shake is an actual move performed by pretty much everybody at Oklahoma City Police Department, but it's not talked about. No, the public doesn't know about it. Essentially, that it's a accepted tactic and practice by OCPD. So that's an interesting revelation that comes with that video. There's also the fact that Rocky gets caught lying to cover an omission. Now, this is, to me, very interesting, folks. You got to really understand why this is so bad, because he omitted the fact that Carla Raines had denied being a victim somewhere between 7 and 9 times, as you saw counted off in my part 1 video in her interrogation. Every time she denied being a victim, I put a number up on the screen and counted them for you, right? So, okay, we know that she denied this. This did not get into Rocky Gregory's report. None of that stuff got into Rocky Gregory's report. Now, when called on that by Michelle Malkin, folks, and this is how we know Rocky knew that what he did was wrong. This is how we know. We know he knows it's wrong because he tries to lie to cover up what happened. And that's how we know he knows. Okay? He lies and says, oh no, she kind of was reluctant to speak in front of her grandmother, which it was actually her mother. And he says she was reluctant to speak in front of her, and so she pulled me aside, or she kind of like indicated. Like, he's got this whole thing where it was like this nod and a wink where she was getting him to pull aside, or in hushed tones kind of situation or whatever. And he's trying to claim that she had to pull him aside so that she could then tell him actually everything that happened, and that she was denying it because that was when it was in earshot of her grandmother, who was actually her mother. So you go and you listen to the interview, folks, in part 2 of the Carla Raines allegations, and you know there's nothing like that happening. There's no wink and a nod situation between them going on. There's no hushed tones. It's just the interview just goes doot 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 doot. You know, there's no break. There's nothing to suggest what Rocky is claiming about she wanted to pull me aside or some crap that he's trying to claim. It's bogus. And so when we know these things, obviously, it makes it real interesting when we see Rocky, as we're going to see in this episode today, call out his first false accuser. And it's going to be a great time. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get into it. What we're going to do here first, folks, I have Mr. Mitch with me down there. Want to say hi, Mitch?
Hello, everybody. Hi. Hey. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, no problem, man. We're gonna go ahead and get some licks in on Rocky Gregory today. So, so what we got coming up right here, folks. First for you is Brian Bates talking with his friend who worked in the prosecutor's office there in Oklahoma for a time. She's now a defense attorney and that sort of thing. But she worked in that office. She kind of knows how things go there. She understands the process there, and so she's able to help explain it for us. She's a friend of Brian's. So I will say in here that Brian is obviously a friend of the judge that set the bond in this. And folks, when we get to the bond on this, you're going to see why this is kind of such a red hot issue for some people, because he's friends with her, and so he is asking people to be forgiving of her decision, right? I understand that, and yes, Brian, I am forgiving. However, it's not going to stop me from criticizing the fact that your friend set a no bail situation, as you called it. So, what happens in this situation with the bond is just truly, truly amazing. So, that's what this first part's going to cover, is that and the arrest of Daniel Holtzclaw. He's going to go over Rocky Greger's report of the arrest, and so you guys are going to see how this all went down. Essentially, how Daniel was brought into custody. The reason why he's talking to his prosecutor friend is to explain to us what the thing that was filed. They call it, it's a form they file to make an arrest, and it's basically just this one's 3 pages long, and it just briefly and very one-sidedly lays out the accusations to that point. And the judge looks at that, and there you go, boom, right? So that's what it is. And so we're going to be listening to how this process happens and how the decisions get made and whether or not the defense is even allowed to be a part of it. So it's very interesting stuff. So let me go ahead and hit play, folks. And Mitch and I will be here doing the commentary as it plays.
In the last episode, I wrapped up the allegations of 41-year-old Northeast Oklahoma City resident Carla Raines. In the investigative timeline, Oklahoma City Police sex crimes detectives Rocky Gregory and Kim Davis have documented 7 accusers, or alleged victims, in this investigation. An investigation that started in the early morning hours of June 18, 2014, after 57-year-old Janie Liggins was pulled over for swerving while she was driving home from a male friend's house around 2 a.m. Within hours of that traffic stop's conclusion, Liggins made contact with police and reported that she had been sexually assaulted during that traffic stop. The officer was later identified as 27-year-old Oklahoma City Patrol Officer Daniel Holtzclaw. We are now 2 months into the criminal investigation, and detectives and prosecutors are ready to make the allegations against Officer Holtzclaw public. But first, they've got to get him into custody. It's August 21st, 2014. A Thursday, and Detective Kim Davis is sitting at her desk at Oklahoma City Police Headquarters. She's finishing up a probable cause affidavit for the arrest of Officer Daniel Holtzclaw.
Probable cause affidavit.
You'll
folks.
recall back in episode 7,
Yep.
I spoke with local defense attorney and former Oklahoma County prosecutor Angela Sonajera. I recently sat down with her again and asked her to help explain exactly what's going on at this point in the investigation.
Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it. Probable cause affidavit is usually referred to as a PC affidavit. It doesn't list all of the narratives. It doesn't list all the victims. It's just enough for a judge to say, yes, I believe there's enough probable cause to arrest this person.
Is it a very high standard that Kim Davis is going to have to overcome?
It's not huge, but you have to have probable cause to stop somebody and to arrest them. So they have to have enough for the judge to say that's in that documentation, because obviously arresting somebody is a very serious thing. They don't want to just issue an arrest warrant just because. They have to make sure everything's in order.
Could we consider this a pretty one-sided, very short narrative of what at least the prosecution is alleging happened?
Yes, that's a good way of phrasing it. Yes.
The 3-page affidavit.
Actually, let me just say one thing. Do you guys remember how they got Stephen Avery in custody? Kratz had to go. Yeah, do you know? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was trying to
Well,
talk to you, but go ahead, buddy.
Kratz got wind that Stephen Avery should have been on probation or parole, basically, about his firearm charge originally, but it wasn't. It had been, in the process of him getting exonerated, it had been wiped away. He went and found and tracked down the paperwork at the proper courthouse somewhere and got it. Whatever he had to do, he had to get it from somewhere and take it somewhere else, I think to Sheboygan, so that in Sheboygan they knew that Stephen, and whatever, and then they were able to go because he had the gun hanging over his bed. He was in violation of the parole that had basically not existed until the moment they wanted to arrest him. And so, look, some of the games prosecutors play during the arrest process. But there you go. That was their complaint, to get a PC affidavit for Stephen Avery. So,
Yes, exactly. And I never could understand that where they dug that up because he was exonerated, so he was not on any parole.
Well,
that we
he was
knew of.
exonerated for the rape of Penny Burnson, right? So
Yeah.
so what they eventually started to figure out was, well, but not the gun charge, and that's the way their wheels spin. So I mean, they went and conjured that up so that they could arrest him for a gun above his bed that didn't belong to him and that he never used. You know, so
Yeah.
that's where it's at with Stephen Avery. You know, it's pretty obvious.
Weapons under disability charge. That's what That's where it all started, right there.
Yeah.
Garbage.
Right. So I just want to point that out. That's where they got the PC affidavit, or that's what the PC affidavit for Stephen Avery said. So.
Which I have posted on this episode's homepage at holtzclawtrial.com, in very damning language, lays out the case that Holtzclaw is a serial sexual predator who used his badge to target and victimize at least 7 women, ranging in age from 39 to 57. And the common thread amongst the listed victims, they are all black females, and all but one having a documented history of drug usage and/or prostitution. Detectives Davis and Gregory take the completed affidavit to the Oklahoma County Courthouse. There they seek out Judge Cindy Trong for her signature authorizing the arrest. Again, Angela Sonajera.
Well, usually the police will have the PC affidavit. They will take it to a judge that sometimes is on call. They kind of rotate. Sometimes also, like at night, if they want a search warrant, there'll be a specific judge that's on call and they'll go to their house. But they'll go to the courthouse, seek out some particular judge. Sometimes it's just whoever's available. Hand them the documents, and the judge will look it over. If there is probable cause, they will sign the documentation, and that will start the process rolling, and they'll set a bond at that point, usually.
Judge Trong is a former prosecutor in the Oklahoma County DA's office. She started there shortly after graduating law school in 2001. She worked as an ADA under District Attorney Wes Lane and his predecessor, David Prater. She was elected judge in 2010. She has held her office ever since without drawing an opponent. I just want to interject a brief disclosure. I know Judge Trong personally, and I consider her a friend. I first met her when she was a prosecutor working for DA Wes Lane. I also volunteered to aid in her campaign when she successfully ran for election. Judge Trong reviewed the affidavit as prepared by Detective Davis. This document is the only investigative materials the judge will see before authorizing Officer Holtzclaw's arrest, which when executed, unleashed local...
Which reminds me of that John Mayer lyric, when they control the information, they can bend it all they want. That's exactly what this affidavit brings to mind whenever I'm, so he's going to end up pretty much reading it here, so we'll get there eventually here. Any other thoughts before we continue there, Mitch?
Well, like you said earlier, they said very one-sided, this document.
Right.
So it's going to make Daniel look like a monster just to start with.
Right, the devil incarnate, right? As Lynn Kaczynski once called Stephen Avery. So, anyway.
Yes.
National and international media coverage and criticism.
I want to disclose that I worked with Judge Trong too when she was an assistant district attorney. We worked briefly together, and I appeared in front of her as a prosecutor and briefly as a defense attorney when she had a criminal docket. She may have just been the presiding judge at that time or on call, like I said. The police will go to that judge, present the documentation, and there is no hearing per se. The judge will look over the documents, as I said, decide whether or not there's probable cause, and then things get filed.
No hearing means no defense.
The process starts going. At that point, the defense attorney has no say in anything because the person hasn't been arrested, so there is no defense attorney at that point. But yes, it is somewhat one-sided. I don't think it's a nefarious thing, though. It's just kind of how the process works. As soon as the bond is set and the person is arrested,
it may be how the process works,
have an
but
opportunity to
I think the process needs to alter a bit.
It's kind of like they're presenting the elements.
They're like one-sided.
Yeah, right? I mean, let's just stop here for a second, because this is disturbing. I mean, this is like a blank check for the prosecutors, to go in and just hang you. They can say whatever the hell they want, almost. I mean, look at how well-founded the stuff that Rocky, Gregory, and Kim are bringing. And nobody's figuring it out. Nobody's figuring this out. It's like, so I know nobody here is checking this stuff. I know Judge Trong didn't look into this very much before she set the ridiculous bond you guys are about to hear that gets set. But, I mean, yeah, that's to me bizarre. The defense, I mean, the defendant isn't even represented in any type of way in that proceeding. That, to me, is troubling. There should be some kind of on-call advocate. Somebody that can get in there and just argue at least some of the most basic arguments for somebody that isn't there to argue it for themselves, or something. It just, this process where they can do this without any representation for the accused is troubling.
Yeah. And look at the time as well. They couldn't wait till the next business day to get things going. They do this with, like I said, an on-call judge, as well. Like I said, the timing is very questionable, too, to get that first step going as well. It's like you said, there's no interference. It's just, here's the information we want you to hear. The judge makes goes ahead and goes with that.
Yeah.
So,
and there's very little, fact-checking in it. I mean, you're going to hear them explain, folks, here with, and I'm not going to go too much into this because you're going to hear them explain it, but you're going to find out that prosecutors themselves don't even listen to these interviews most of the time and stuff like that. It's just shocking that there can be this little review with such heavy, weighty allegations. It's shocking to me. So anyways, all right, let's go ahead and move forward.
I believe those elements are there, and that's enough to arrest somebody.
The PC affidavit presented to Judge Trong refers to each of the alleged victims by their initials and begins with the Terry Morris encounter. The affidavit, however, doesn't disclose that she told vastly different versions of the same allegations, doesn't mention she couldn't pick Holtzclaw out of a photo lineup as her attacker, or how she identified a different style of police patrol car, nor how Holtzclaw's AVL didn't match her story. Nevertheless, Morris's allegation,
well, that is until she changed it to match his AVL,
but forcible oral sodomy, which alone carries up to 20 years in the penitentiary. The affidavit next alleges Janie Liggins was forced to expose her breasts, pull down her pants, and then perform oral sex on Officer Holtzclaw. Detective Davis points out that Liggins submitted to a SANE, or rape exam, but the affidavit fails to mention that the results of that exam did not support her allegation.
Right. You get that, folks. He just said they mentioned the SANE test, but not the results of it. You get what that's supposed to do, folks. That's them trying to slip it under the radar, get the judge to assume that test came back positive. That is bull. That is crap. That is absolute crap. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. That was very negative, that test there, too, as well.
Right.
But like you said, the wording in that affidavit makes it sound like, hey, we did the rape test. Of course it's positive,
but not, of course. Yeah. But by just saying they did it and nothing else, I mean, I think the judge then just assumes, oh, okay, well, the judge may also have the question that would occur to me as I'm sitting here talking about this and running on about it. So, I mean, most likely the judge would have a question like I do right now. But I don't know. They might just grant it anyway and go, it's insignificant. And in the weight of all this other stuff, right? Because we're not done yet. There's more to this affidavit. So, all right, here we go. Let's.
From there, the affidavit focuses on accuser Tabitha Barnes, stating, quote, the defendant harassed her on various occasions, end quote, and details how Officer Holtzclaw allegedly burglarized Barnes's home when he called in the open door on her residence, a residence that had recently been burglarized, conducted a protective sweep, and encountered Barnes's boyfriend, Terry Williams. The affidavit states Holtzclaw told Williams he shouldn't be in the home, and does it in a way as to make it seem nefarious on Officer Holtzclaw's part. And
folks, you get what the way the prosecution's coloring it. The prosecution not telling the judge that Daniel was talking to a registered sex offender. The affidavit is not telling the judge all the reasons why Daniel had just cause to be barking up Tabitha's tree, okay, because her house was a known crack house. This stuff's not getting mentioned, okay? Only that he was harassing her, and he burgled her house and then harassed somebody inside of her house, and leaves out all of the peripheral information that would explain why he was there. I mean, that's intent, folks. That is intent.
Just Daniel had every right to do what he did. It's called exigent circumstances, which gave him the right to do what he did there. But then, of course, they had to make it sound a lot worse than what it really was. You know,
right, and I know,
favor them.
And I know that what Daniel was doing was not out of the ordinary. No. You know how I know that, folks? I know that because I was a freaking knucklehead in my 20s. And I was doing a lot of dumb shit that I shouldn't have been doing in my 20s. Okay? Eventually I grew out of it. But when I was in that mode, when I was in that way of life, I encountered police officers and I encountered people that lived at houses like Tabitha's. You know? Similar to that anyways. You know what I mean? I encountered this situation, and then I encountered Daniel Holtzclaw in my daily life back when I was living that way. You know? So I know it's acceptable behavior for cops to do this. It's you may have your issues with it. You may have your issues with it, but it is accepted. It is accepted. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because his own brothers aren't helping him here with that.
Yeah.
They aren't doing it. They're letting him hang. They're fucking letting him hang. And they're not fessing up to the fact that the things that he was doing were perfectly ordinary. Yeah. Think of them what you like, folks. I can understand you may have issues with some of the tactics, but it is accepted, and that's what I want to point out. So, any thoughts before we start?
Keep going. Keep going.
All right.
Just keep going.
I'd argue that's mostly due to the fact Detective Davis failed to mention Williams was a registered sex offender, and indeed, he most likely should not have been residing in Barnes's home, which is close to a school, a public park, and Barnes herself has young children.
A school and a
living
public
in her
park,
house.
folks.
And she
The
has children.
affidavit
Young
next
children.
details accuser Carla Raines.
They
While
have every right to
Detective
search.
Davis is
Look
certain to
around,
mention that Raines claims Holtzclaw had her expose her breasts, she doesn't bother to mention she initially and 7 times denied being a victim. And even when she does eventually implicate Holtzclaw, Raines admits he never directly told her to expose herself. With accuser Sherry Ellis, Detective Davis says that Holtzclaw encountered her at one location, allegedly forced her to perform oral sex upon him, and that he then drove her to a second location, where he removed her from his patrol car and vaginally raped her from behind. This must have sounded absolutely horrific to the judge,
Sure.
especially considering there is no mention that Ellis described her attacker as a short, dark-skinned black male.
Oh, I'm sure they left
And
that
the
out.
location she claims she was
yeah.
taken to is not supported
Wasn't
by the
important.
AVL
Wasn't important.
evidence.
Right. And that's the
Then
other
there's
thing, folks.
accuser Florine.
If you caught that one where he's talking about in the location that she claims that she was taken to by Daniel is not supported by the GPS. So that's another interesting thing, but these aren't mentioned, right? It's all Daniel is the devil, you know? So
Mathis, whom Detective Davis describes as being stopped at Northeast 18th and Kate Avenue, and that Officer Holtzclaw allegedly fondled her breasts on the top of her clothing. Interestingly enough, there is no mention that Mathis claims to be the housekeeper of accuser Tabitha Barnes,
right?
and that Holtzclaw's AVL shows he never encountered Mathis at Northeast 18th and Kate. Finally, the affidavit ends with accuser Carla Johnson and her allegations that Officer Holtzclaw touched her breasts and vagina while searching for drugs. All in all, the affidavit for arrest, prepared by Detective Kim Davis, calls for Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw to be arrested on 9 criminal complaints: 1 count of rape in the first degree, rape by instrumentation, 3 counts of forcible oral sodomy, 2 counts of sexual battery, and 2 counts of indecent exposure. Once again, Angela Sonajera.
Rape is a very serious allegation. Forcible oral sodomy, all of them are sexually based crimes. Those are some of the worst crimes that we have. Because of that, the ranges of punishment are pretty harsh. Some of them carry up to 10 years. The rape charge carries 5 to life. So it's a big range of punishment, but those are, for the most serious crimes. Sometimes the detectives will list out crimes that they think have been committed on their own based on their investigation. Sometimes when it's something like this, when involving a high-profile defendant or high-profile suspect, it is done in conjunction with the DA's office. It is not uncommon for that to happen because a lot of times the police will have certain information and they're not sure maybe they have enough to arrest somebody or to charge somebody. So they'll go to an ADA and say, hey, do we have enough here? What do we need if we don't? What are we looking at? If we, is there something else we can use instead of this particular charge we're looking at? So sometimes it is done in conjunction with the DA's office.
Just because they've listed certain charges in this probable cause affidavit for arrest, does that necessarily mean that's what he'll ultimately be charged with?
Not always. Typically what happens is they'll list the crimes they think have been committed by this person, and then when those get to the DA or the ADA, they'll go through and look at everything and see if those elements of those particular crimes are there. If they're not, they'll decline certain charges or maybe change it to another charge that might fit the elements a little better. So it's not always the same thing as they start out with.
I'm not giving anything away here. Most people listening are somewhat familiar with this case. We're only at 7 accusers, and we know ultimately there's 13. So obviously at some point, additional charges are going to be added. And really we're at 9, and we know ultimately he has 36 charges against him.
Correct.
So it's more of a kind of a fluid document. This is basically what is utilized, I guess, to get him in custody, and then charges are filed. But even once charges are filed, they can be amended and changed and those sorts of things.
Right. They can be amended right up into trial, basically, because you have certain information at that point, and like you said, you want to get somebody in custody if you think they're a threat to society, and so you charge them with what you have, and sometimes that goes on the news or is in the newspaper, or somebody tells somebody else, and then more victims can come forward, and then more charges may develop from that. And then even like when you get to like a preliminary hearing, if there's certain testimony, the charges can be amended at that point based on the testimony that was given. So it is a very fluid document.
So, you're able to amend all the way up to trial. Now, what I think is interesting about this, folks, is that, think about this, which way do things usually get amended? Because in this case, they certainly had ample opportunity to amend in the opposite fucking direction, where they could have dug into some of these interviews and gone, ooh, well, this is getting kind of shaky. This one's a little shaky, and they might have actually discounted some of these just because, well, for instance, the ones that kept describing a black man driving a black and white patrol car. I mean, perhaps those ones, I mean, it's just, for me, the lack of looking into this. But the fact she talks about how it could be amended all the way up to trial, but it's never going to get amended that way. It's only ever going to get amended to more charges or, more serious charges. It's just generally going to tend to go that way, not the opposite. So, yeah.
Once the judge signs off on an arrest warrant, a lot of people, especially people who live here in Oklahoma, are familiar with websites like OSCN and stuff like that. Typically, once they get an arrest warrant signed, how long is it before that becomes general public knowledge where even the defendant could be tipped off that there's a warrant for their arrest?
Generally doesn't take very long. It kind of just depends on how long it takes to get on OSCN. I've seen it happen in a matter of days. I've seen it take a few weeks. It really just depends. On a high-profile case like this, it probably won't take very long because it'll be given top priority.
Which probably explains why immediately, I don't think it's any accident that immediately after this was signed, they went right out and put him under arrest.
Probably not.
It's just after 2 in the afternoon. Judge Trong signs the arrest warrant, and officers assemble to decide how best to take Daniel Holtzclaw into custody. Remember, up to this point, he hasn't been arrested or charged for anything. He was simply relieved of duty on June 18th and has been free to move about in any way he wishes with no restrictions. Detective Gregory decides it would probably be best to take Holtzclaw into custody somewhere out in the open, in public, and to try to catch him off guard.
Yeah.
So,
And to try
they
to
decide
catch him
to
off
call
guard.
Holtzclaw and tell him they need him to speak with his major, Brian Jennings. Holtzclaw says he'll be a...
You want to say something about that? Or you're...
I was just going to say, they're talking about someone in public and all this, and they made a very public spectacle of this arrest.
Right.
I mean, they brought a small little army in there to arrest him.
Yes.
So
they did.
Yeah,
and then it gets described.
Yeah.
So
it's just wow.
Yeah, they had like all the gang or some of the gang unit and it gets
Yeah.
So here we go. Let's listen to who all was there.
Yeah.
the gym in northwest Oklahoma City and can step outside to talk. Less than an hour after the warrant is signed, a team of uniformed and undercover officers converge on the Gold's Gym in the 2300 block of West Memorial Road. As Holtzclaw steps outside, he's approached by Detective Gregory, who extends his hand in greeting, but then proceeds to place him under arrest. Here's how Detective Gregory described the arrest when he sat down with the reporter with the Daily Oklahoman newspaper.
We was a little worried. He was big. So had the gang guys show up, and actually there was a major that had called him up there and said, hey, I need to give you some paperwork. Me and my partner, Rob High, we go up there, and as soon as he turned around to see me, he knew what was going on.
What was his face?
Shock. It was shock. You could tell I felt like his heartbeat was starting to go.
Okay, here's your bets. Was it shock that he was being arrested for all these allegations, or is it shock at how bad of a detective Rocky Gregory and Kim Davis are?
Two.
You know. All right, let's move on.
But he never was angry, anything, didn't show anything like that. I shook hands with him because I wanted it to be a calm interaction.
Oh, did you? A calm interaction, did you?
And,
He would have asked him to come in to surrender himself. He would have.
I think he would have too.
Yeah.
And that's what gets me about. I mean, when I hear Rocky say, I extended my hand and I wanted it to be a calm, whatever. It's like, I don't think you did though, Rocky. I don't think you wanted it to be calm. I think you wanted Daniel to resist, and you wanted to be able to pounce on him with that small army you brought with you.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I tell you what, Rocky, I'm glad Daniel didn't, but part of me fucking wishes he would have ripped your fucking arm off and beat you about the fucking head with it. So that's just to tell you just how much respect I have for you and your skill set. So,
yes.
So, all right, moving on.
Best. And, we just didn't want any problems or anything like that. We're just doing what we're supposed to do. And he obeyed every command, turn around, and hands behind the back, and so I put the handcuffs on him. And just kind of went from there. Put him in one of the gang guys' cars. We followed them down to the county jail. They had to clear out the county jail. Anytime an officer arrives, everybody goes on lockdown, and there is no inmates around. They don't want them seeing them, dealing with them. It is for their protection, the officer protection. And it is pretty quiet around there. That's usually one of the busier places. And I just remember going through with him. He was loud on the phone. We was trying to give him some courtesy.
Who did he call?
I believe his dad. And he was. I can't remember whether he really cried then or not.
Immediately after being placed into custody, Holtzclaw was transported to the Oklahoma County Jail, where he is formally booked in and has his mugshot taken. And he wouldn't be released anytime soon, at least not under the current bail that had been set by Judge Trong. I asked Angela to provide us with some more details as to the assigning of bond and exactly when in this process it was set.
Probably right when that probable cause affidavit was signed, because that's telling the police you can go arrest this person now, and you have to set a bond. And a bond is usually set by what's called a bond schedule, meaning there's like a list of charges, and then they have certain prices or amounts that the bond will be. Like, for example, maybe an assault and battery with a dangerous weapon will be $5,000, or trespassing will be $500. That just means that the judge looks at the person's charges, whether or not they have prior charges, or if there's 2 or 3 charges, kind of add all the numbers together. That's the bond, and that's the amount that the person has to pay or have a bondsman pay to get out of jail. This bond is very unusual in that it was $5 million, and then secondly, it's $5 million cash.
Yeah.
And what does that mean when they say cash?
That means you can't go to a bondsman and put up what's called a surety bond, where you just pay part of the bond. A cash bond means you have to pay all of it.
All right, folks. So you get that, right? What they just said. Now, it's going to get even better when you find out what a normal high bond in Oklahoma is. But what she just said there is it wasn't just a $5 million bond where he could go down and put down 10%, which would have been, if he could have come up with $500,000. Right, that would have been 10%. So he would have had to come up with $500,000 to get a bail bondsman to get him out, right? So that would have been the difference. But then they make it cash. So like he literally has to go down to Wells Fargo and pull out $5 million in cash for the bank or for the court. I mean, seriously, who could raise $5 million? I mean, let's be realistic. Who could ever raise $5 million in cash like that? It's just, anyway. Very few people, I will say.
Calling J.G. Wentworth up there.
Right?
God.
Yeah, it's totally freaking. So, anyways, all right, we'll move on to some of the other issues here.
So, have you ever in your career, how long have you been a lawyer?
Let's see, I think now, 01, so 18 years.
18 years.
Almost.
Have you ever seen a bond that was $5 million?
No.
It's essentially no bond.
Essentially, yeah. Because most people would not have the means to secure that at all.
So you can't put up just a portion. There's no need to even call a bondsman because the judge just said you have to put this up literally in cash.
Right. What most people probably don't realize is that bond is not supposed to be a form of punishment. It's just supposed to ensure that you'll show up for your court dates. However, there is not a presumption of innocence when a bond is set. The court actually sets your bond with the assumption that you're guilty, and in this case, those are very serious charges, hence the high bond.
So anyone who's maybe wants to criticize Judge Trong for the high amount, she, even though in the eyes of the law there's a presumption of innocence until proven guilty, but specifically in Oklahoma law, it's the presumption of guilt whenever bond is actually set.
Right, and you also have the factor too, the nature of these charges, they're bad. I mean, they're bad. They're not a trespassing charge. So the likelihood that somebody will run or flee because of those charges are being filed or they're being arrested for them, is probably very high. It would be difficult for me to want to stay and face my accusers or go to court on a rape charge as opposed to a trespassing charge, because the stakes obviously are much higher for a rape charge. Rape charge carries up to life in prison. Trespassing is maybe a fine or a misdemeanor at best. So that's part of the bond setting too, is the judge kind of takes all of that together and sets a number. And again, it's a high profile case. He has some notoriety. He's known probably at this point a little bit. If not in Oklahoma City, he'll be known nationwide soon. They've got to make sure he comes back to court. And
some of the insights I have, I know the judge was also told about the DNA evidence that they had found and that they had not identified who it belonged to. So potentially they believed that there were additional victims out there that they had yet to identify. And I think one of the concerns that somebody would have is you wouldn't want any defendant trying to reach out and intimidate other victims or potential witnesses.
Right.
And the best way to do that would be to keep them locked up.
Right.
And something else a lot of people may not realize, but this comes up, it didn't in this case, but in other cases, a lot of people will want to use a public defender because defense attorneys are expensive, but a lot of people don't realize, and I've come across this, If you manage to make bond, which bond in Oklahoma County oftentimes is pretty low, $500 to $2,500, and you only have to put up a percentage of that.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize that when you exercise that right and you use a bondsman and you put that money up, there's a good chance you now will no longer qualify for a public defender. Has that been your experience?
Yes. Typically what happens is be in a courtroom and the judge will call the docket and someone will say, I just bonded out, but I need to get the application for a public defender. Then the judge will ask what their bond was. And if it's, pretty high, like, $5,000, $10,000, then they'll say, well, you can get the application and fill it out, but you're probably not going to qualify for a public defender because those are for truly indigent people. In their thought process, or the system's thought process, I guess, is that if you can afford to bond out, even if somebody else did it for you, you can afford to get an attorney.
And then something else, in a case like this where, say, bond is set at, in my opinion, and you tell me if this would be right or not, in my opinion, in Oklahoma County, a high bond is typically somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
If a person has a bond amount that is set high and they can't make it and they feel that was unfairly set too high, is there any sort of recourse or anything that a defendant can do if they truly feel their bond was unjustly set?
Yes, they or their attorney can have a motion to reduce the bond. And what that is that's a hearing that's set in front of a judge, and the attorney will give a reason to the judge why the bond should be lower. Kind of like what we were saying earlier, that it's not supposed to be a form of punishment. It's just to ensure that you'll show up. So the attorney will, point out the ties that they have to the community, if they've lived in the state for a long time, if they have a job here, if they have relatives here, they something that ties them to this area and ensure their appearance. And sometimes the judge will agree with that, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll take a passport or something else just to ensure it too. But the bond hearing is that avenue.
Almost immediately, as Officer Holtzclaw is taken into custody and booked into jail, the media is alerted to his arrest and a press conference is called by the Oklahoma City Police Department. The story of an alleged serial rapist with a badge is breaking news. Despite many groups and individuals claiming this story received little or no attention, the truth is, the media coverage was immediate, intense, and spanned the globe. The following is a sample of the breaking news as reported locally by NBC
And
affiliate
one-sided.
KFOR News.
And one-sided, yeah.
And one-sided.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Channel 4.
Oklahoma City police officer accused of shocking sex crimes.
So far, 7 victims have come forward, but police say there may be more. Today, court records are providing a timeline of the disturbing allegations. Officer Daniel Holtzclaw, with the police department for 3 years, is accused of raping and sexually assaulting women he pulled over while on the job. First at 6, News Channel 4's Jesse Wells is covering that story, and he's live in the newsroom with the very latest on the investigation. And Jesse, I know you have reaction from one of the victim's friends.
That's right, Kevin. According to court records, the sexual assaults began back in February and ended in June of this year. The sad thing is the story of one victim you'll hear in just a minute has been duplicated several times over by other women on the city's northeast side. An arrest warrant now details how the first allegations against Holtzclaw came to light in February. A woman claims Holtzclaw touched her bare breasts, adding that the victim had city warrants, and Holtzclaw advised her to play by his rules, and he would help her out. From there, allegations arose from different victims on March 14th.
All right, I just want to remind everybody at this point that city warrants are like stupid. The cops just don't care. And you hear that at trial from even Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory, how they even realize this fact that most cops don't care about city warrants. They're looking for felony warrants, violence, things like that, something like that, where before they'll act. They're not generally interested. And so the idea of trying to threaten somebody with something that cops don't care about just rings to me to be bullshit. Anyway.
Yeah. And that was later used against Daniel because that he ignored the warrants against some of these women they had. And like you said, they were so minor, and like the most of the time, the cops do ignore them because they're minor, they're misdemeanors.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yep, it's wild. All right, let's see here.
April 14th, May 7th, May 8th, May 26th, and lastly, on June 18th. Following that alleged assault in June, here at Northeast 50th and Lincoln, Holtzclaw got pulled off the streets. All of his alleged crimes took place in the Spring Lake Division on the city's northeast side. So far, 7 victims have come forward, all African-American women, and police admit there may be more that haven't come forward.
Come forward, you say? Okay.
We're hoping that this does not affect our public trust.
Sorry.
Haven't found yet.
Right. Yeah, that's what it's more like. And there's others ready to come forward and be cultivated, I would rather say, actually. Anyway.
No, it probably will, and it can.
And right now, Holtzclaw is still on paid leave while the case is investigated. He does remain, though, behind bars at the Oklahoma County Jail. He's being held on a $5 million bond. Put it back to you.
While the arrest of a police officer for multiple sexual assaults allegedly committed while on duty is newsworthy on its own, you need to keep in mind that at this time, local, national, and international news was fixated on a racially charged incident out of Ferguson, Missouri. The August 9th, 2014 fatal shooting of Michael Brown, an 18-year-old black youth, by a 28-year-old white police officer named Darren Wilson. Just 3 days before Officer Holtzclaw's arrest in Oklahoma City, every news channel was leading with the uptick in violent clashes between protesters and police after a curfew was imposed and the National Guard was called out to restore peace. That incident is also known as the Ferguson
I'm sure that had the
Uprising,
people really
or
happy.
Ferguson race riots.
Yeah, there was a lot of tension between the cops and the minority community.
Right. Well, and I imagine bringing the National Guard out to shut everybody up probably didn't play too well with the masses. So
Exactly.
Yikes.
Exactly.
Jesus, it's a freaking powder keg.
Yeah.
Oklahoma is now facing the same potential powder keg of what is being described as a white
Great minds think
officer
alike, I guess.
who intentionally targeted vulnerable African-American females. Though, in reality, Officer Holtzclaw is himself a minority. He's half Japanese. But that reality is often lost on a media and social justice mobs with a proven, attention-grabbing agenda. White cop versus black citizen.
Right.
It's while Holtzclaw is sitting in jail with a $5 million bond that his father, Eric Holtzclaw, begins contacting attorneys. One of those attorneys that he calls is high-profile criminal defense attorney Scott Adams.
You got something to say about Scott Adams?
Scott Adams has turned out to be a buddy of Mr. Draper's, David Draper's later, if we're going to find out.
Right.
They were
I have seen another video that showed that he has been quite supportive of Prater, and that is a concern for me. I'm torn right now of what to think about Mr. The defense attorney here. I'm hearing some things that disturb me. I'm hearing some other things that maybe indicate to me that I don't know. I guess I'm gonna reserve judgment on him until I read the transcripts.
Yeah.
When I read the transcripts and I see how well he performed, then I'll make my judgment.
I will say right now, from what I'm learning too, it's very much like the defense that Brendan got at his trial. And
right.
What was going on behind the scenes between the defense attorney and the prosecution.
Right.
There's a lot of similarities here.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
I recently sat down with Mr. Adams in his office at his law firm, Adams & Associates, located in downtown Oklahoma City. Another disclosure, Scott Adams and I are personal and professional friends. Best friends by most people's definition. I first met Mr. Adams many years ago, probably around 1996, when he cross-examined me, more like crucified me, while I was on the stand as a witness for the prosecution to a crime his client had allegedly committed. Despite the defendant being convinced he was going to be found guilty, Mr. Adams worked his magic and the jury acquitted. Mr. Adams's take-no-prisoners approach to jury trial left an impression upon me. I hated that he embarrassed and belittled me on the stand, but I admired his unapologetic defense of his client. When years later, in 2005, I found myself the target of an overzealous prosecutor who had me arrested and falsely charged with several serious felonies. I knew exactly who I needed to call. That experience of working with Mr. Adams and doing much of my own investigative work to prove my innocence is what convinced me to get my license and become a private investigator and work on the behalf of others. I now office out of Mr. Adams' law firm, and we actually have lived next door to each other as neighbors for several years.
Full disclosure.
I've practiced law for 30 years now. I graduated law school in 1989 from Oklahoma City University, and I've basically practiced exclusively criminal trial litigation.
You would be defined as an actual trial attorney.
Yes, that's literally all that I do.
There's a lot of attorneys who will take on criminal cases, but they're not known for going all the way to trial.
Yes, and over the years we've had a reputation for going to trial.
Take me back to the day that I'm assuming you were first contacted by Eric Holtzclaw.
It was late summer of 2014, and I recall that I received a phone call from a police officer, and I believe he was a lieutenant from some other police department here in Oklahoma. You know, prior to the phone call, I'd seen some clips on the local media stations and in the newspaper that there was an officer who'd been arrested here in Oklahoma City. What I recall, and when I received the phone call, it was his father, and he is a lieutenant at a different police department here in Oklahoma. And he started talking about his son, who was the officer who'd been arrested here in Oklahoma City, and I put two and two together and figured out they were the same people.
What was his reaction, or what was he saying to you? Just, how do I get my son out, or what was his concern?
Well, he was very methodical, and his number one concern was that his son was in jail, and he wanted to know what we could do to get him out of that situation, which, obviously at that point in time, I didn't have any information, so I didn't know. But that was his number one concern. His second concern was that he felt that his son was being charged inappropriately, that he hadn't done anything wrong, and that was his second concern.
And it'd be fair to say that up to this point, when someone calls you to see about representation, the only thing you have to go on are the charging documents, right?
Unfortunately, when I get these phone calls like this, the only thing I have to go off of is what the government has suggested or what they filed, which in this case was a probable cause affidavit that had some of the information, and that's all that I had.
Is it pretty typical that once you finally get to some actual evidence or discovery that it's not nearly as nefarious as they write
information? Yeah.
These reports?
A simple answer to your question is yes. I mean, typically they're skewed in favor of the state or the government. They typically leave out a lot of exculpatory type evidence and things of that nature. But still, when I read this one, I was taken back by the sheer number of allegations.
Did Eric Holtzclaw, did he know what the bond situation was at that point? Did he understand how dire it was?
Yes, he did. He knew that it was serious. I don't think that he understood how serious it was.
What becomes your first priority?
My first priority in this case was to try to get Daniel out of jail. It's so much easier to work with a client and develop a defense, obviously, if your client is out of jail and can have access to come into the office and things of that nature. But that was my number one concern, is what could I do immediately, if anything, to get him out of jail.
And in this case, Daniel had a $5 million cash bond. Had you ever seen anything like that in Oklahoma County?
Like I've said, I've practiced law for 30 years, and I can't recall another defendant ever having a $5 million bond in Oklahoma City.
You get that about 30 years, and he's never seen it
was more
until
the
now.
judge sending a message to the public as opposed to actually enforcing some sort of a bond schedule or something?
I do. I believe it was a message to the entire community that they wanted people, number one, to pay attention to the case, but number two, for whatever reason, they were trying to make an example out of him.
What's the remedy when such a high bond, which basically $5 million cash bond is a no bond? Is there any legal remedy when they do something like that?
The only remedy that we have is to take it up with the district judge here who set the $5 million bond. If I can't get any relief with that particular judge, then I would have to take it up with the Court of Criminal Appeals here in the state of Oklahoma.
The Holtzclaw family, after speaking to several lawyers, eventually decide to retain Mr. Adams to represent Daniel. And, in the near future, Holtzclaw and his legal team will successfully argue for a more reasonable bond. Before that can happen, 2 more accusers will come forward. One will eventually admit to making up the entire story of being sexually assaulted by Officer Holtzclaw. The other, she'll claim Officer Holtzclaw followed her into her home and vaginally raped her in an upstairs bedroom. But those 2 stories are for the next episodes. If you'd like to see and read the actual arrest warrant, police reports, and links to original news coverage, as well as a transcript of this episode, I encourage you to check out this episode's homepage at holtzclawtrial.com.
So that's another point, folks. If you want to go and look at it, any of the things that Brian references during these podcasts, if you go to holtzclawtrial.com and go to the podcast, if you find that there'll be a link with the podcast that'll say go to the homepage, and he has usually a bunch of really good, cool documents that are pertaining to what he's been talking about. Sometimes videos, obviously, if there's an interview, he'll have the video or the audio of that over on that page. So the home pages that go along with each one of these podcasts are also very informative. So this guy has gone to a hell of a lot of trouble to lay it all out there. And yeah, he's laying it out there from the defensive side. He was the defense's investigator, and so yeah, he's doing it from the defense side. But look at the pain this guy takes to be, transparent. Look at what the F he told you about, the defense attorney. I keep forgetting his name. Sam. Is it Sam?
I'm blanking on it too. Yeah,
I keep forgetting, and he's telling you that they live next door to each other, and that sort of thing. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of information that he's conveying that he didn't necessarily need, I guess, maybe to give. But, that's him trying to be transparent. I actually do think this guy is something, blah, blah, blah. This is our history, and I think he does a great job. So he's letting you know, maybe I might have a little bias there. That's him being upfront. That's him being somewhat transparent. And that's one of the things I dig about Brian. And so, this thing is all coming from the defense side, but it's being laid out with a pretty objective, kind of, just, layout on it. So anyways.
Yeah.
All right. So, we're going to be moving into now the next part, and that is going to have to do with, one of the accuser that you just heard him talk about that ended up recanting everything or admitting that it was all made up. So we're going to be moving into the next episode here. Alrighty, hello there, folks. So as you may notice, I don't have Mitch with me for the second part of this video. He wasn't, we had to record this on 2 separate days. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here today, but no worries. Mitch, like the Terminator, he'll be back. You know what I mean? So no worries there. And it looks like I might have caught the Mad Scotsman just after his bedtime, so I'm going to go ahead and go forward because I got a premiere coming up and I wanted to go ahead and get this kind of done before the premiere starts. So, here we go. Let's go ahead and talk about what's going on here today. We've just, in the last episode, or in the first half of this episode, you basically saw how, or listened and heard about how Daniel Holtzclaw was arrested. You heard about the bond and all those sort of things. Now we're going to move into, now that Daniel's been arrested, accusers begin to come out, of course, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. One particular accuser in particular who, I'll just put it this way, folks. It's very, very interesting because up until this point, I thought Rocky was incapable of doing his job. But it turns out, as we see in this, as we're going to hear in this second half of this episode, he's quite capable. He's just very choosy about when he's going to actually use his skill set or not. So it's very interesting. But you're going to see him really dig in to verify the claims that this particular girl is making. And he's really digging in, and he's really, doing all the things he should have been doing all along, which is why I say I thought he was incapable, but it turns out he's not. He actually is capable of doing it, but he just picks and chooses when he wants to. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And then we're going to get into obviously Rocky gives a reason for why he dug in on this accuser so much. He gives a reason, and he basically says that because aspects of her story didn't ring true. And he also mentioned something about the fact that what she was saying didn't match the AVL data. Well, you've had numerous accusers that had that was going on with, but we'll get to that here. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the Brian Bates podcast, and I'll be along here, and I'll jump in with some commentary here and there. Alrighty, here we go.
In the last episode, Oklahoma City Police sex crimes detective Kim Davis submitted a probable cause affidavit to Oklahoma County Judge Cindy Trong, seeking the arrest warrant of Oklahoma City Police Officer Daniel Holtzclaw. Less than an hour after the warrant was signed, Holtzclaw was lured into a public place under the pretense of discussing something with his major. Instead, he was met by Detective Rocky Gregory and a handful of police gang task force officers. Holtzclaw was taken into custody without incident and booked into the Oklahoma County Jail. His bond? It was set at an unprecedented $5 million cash. Immediately upon his arrest, it was his own department that notified the media. And with that, Holtzclaw's name, face, and the allegations against him were made public, and those details were broadcast around the globe.
Officer Daniel Holtzclaw, with the police department for 3 years, is accused of raping and sexually assaulting women he pulled over while on the job.
The chief of the Oklahoma City Police echoing the thoughts of his department after serious accusations of one of his own.
I tell you, it's the officers, it taints all of us, and officers know that, and they take it very personally, and it angers us, and that one of our officers that people trust, and to keep them safe is doing just the opposite, and especially in this fashion. So it's very disturbing.
Officer Daniel Holtzclaw is in custody tonight with several women.
You hear that from the chief there about how they, officers that abuse their authority and things like that. And he's referring to Daniel Holtzclaw, but if I was Rocky Gregory and Kim Davis, I'd be worried about that. I'd be worried about that coming around on me if I was those two. But anyways, moving on.
Men coming forward claiming to be his victims.
Now, rape, sodomy, and sexual battery are just a few of the complaints against him. The sex crimes unit uncovered 6 other women who also claim to have been abused by Holtzclaw.
Traffic stops, some of the individuals were actually just walking in the neighborhood, and they were stopped, searched, threatened in some way. With arrest or something to that extent, and as a result of that, coerced them into providing sexual favors to him.
The chief of police says they want to be open about this investigation as the department works to rebuild trust.
I have to hope that most of the community realizes that our officers, 99.9% of them are trustworthy, and when something like this happens, the officers take it very, very personally.
Tonight he's in jail on a $5 million bond. He could be facing the rest of his life spent in prison.
Police would later say that it was important to make the allegations and Holtzclaw's identity public in hopes other victims would come forward. Keep in mind, investigators still don't know to whom the DNA on the fly of Holtzclaw's uniform pants belonged. And police were correct. Publicizing Holtzclaw's arrest and allegations unleashed a flood of women coming forward claiming to be victims of sexual assault. And the first, a 25-year-old resident of Northeast Oklahoma City. Her name? Shanice Jana Barksdale. According to police, Barksdale, described as a black female who is 5'2" and weighs 175 pounds, contacted police on August 22nd of 2014, the day after Holtzclaw was arrested. Barksdale called the Oklahoma City Police Station first thing that morning at 9 a.m. She was connected to Detective Gregory, who asked her to come in and meet with him at 1:30 that afternoon. When Barksdale arrived, she already had a handwritten statement with her. She gave it to Detective Gregory, who looked it over. I've asked Tia, a professional voice actress, to read Barksdale's statement for us.
Police Officer Daniel Ken Holtzclaw assaulted me back in March. He pulled me over for no reason. He said my left tail light was out, and I didn't know how true that was because I had just changed it that Monday afternoon. I told Mr. Holtzclaw it couldn't be out that fast. I just changed it. He told me that he needed to check inside my car, so he told me to proceed down Lincoln and go into Woodland Park. I asked him, "Why do you need to check inside my car?" He stated, "For safety reasons." So we got into his car and stated on the loudspeaker, "I'm right behind you so you can go." As I'm driving, I pulled into the Woodland Park area and I'm driving down the side street and he told me to stop. We were by a white picket fence. He stepped out the car and walked towards my car and said, "Can you please get out the car?" I was shaking because this has never happened to me before. When I stepped out the car, Mr. Holtzclaw was talking to me about how pretty I was and said he needed to pat me down. I told him I thought a female police officer is supposed to check women. He said in the case, it's my responsibility. I was still shaking and started to cry, and I asked him if I could just go. He told me to turn around and put my hands on my car. He started touching me on my breast, my stomach, my thighs, and he stuck his hands in my pants. He put his gun on my car and told me, "Don't be afraid." I started to run, but I was too scared something else might happen. I was pushing his hand away from me. I didn't feel comfortable at all. I started yelling really loud for help because he was getting too out of control with his hands and mouth. He asked for my ID and told me, "If you say anything to anyone, I know where you live." He got back in his car and drove off. I was so disgusted. I got back in my car and just broke down. And all I can do is cry, cry, and cry. I also started praying to God for watching over me because it could have been worse than it really was.
I just want to take a second to point out, folks, that account there, you're going to realize how much it has almost the exact, like a lot of similarities to Janie Liggins. The actual spot where she claims to have been pulled over, same as Janie Liggins. The way she's talking about how she's acting all scared, Janie Liggins was acting the same way, kept talking about how she was afraid he had a gun and he was afraid he was going to shoot her and all these things, right? So there's a fair amount of similarities in here, and so it was just, that's a very interesting thing to point out as we move forward here.
Signed, Shanice Barksdale.
You can see and read the actual handwritten statement by Barksdale at this episode's homepage at holtzclawtrial.com, or on this season's Instagram by going to @HoltzclawTrial and tapping on episode 18 highlight near the top of the profile. Detective Gregory then began asking Barksdale questions regarding her alleged sexual assault. Barksdale said the date was March 12, 2014. She was certain of the day and date because it was a Wednesday, and that's when she goes out to a club called Cowboys. She said that she was headed to the club when she received a phone call from her boyfriend, and that he asked her to come and meet him at their house in the 2000 block of Northeast 18th Street. Barksdale says she turned around and was heading southbound on North Lincoln Boulevard when she approached Northeast 50th. That's the same intersection where accuser Janie Liggins was stopped. Barksdale stated that as she turned left, or eastbound onto Northeast 50th, she all of a sudden saw a patrol car come up behind her and turn on his overhead strobe lights, indicating she needed to pull over. As she stated in her written account, Holtzclaw pulled her over and falsely claimed she had a burnt-out taillight. Then, he told her he needed her to drive to a nearby park to search her and her vehicle for, quote, safety reasons. At the park,
Holtzclaw commented on Barksdale's body and had her turn around, facing away, so that he could search her. Barksdale protested, and she asked why a female officer wasn't on scene conducting the search. Holtzclaw proceeded to squeeze both of her breasts from behind. Then, according to Barksdale, he used his right hand and moved it underneath her pants, under her panties, and inserted 2 fingers into her vagina. He comments, quote, "It's wet and warm," end quote. In response, Barksdale starts to cry. She said Holtzclaw then asked if he could have sex with her inside her car, commenting that, quote, "It won't take very long, I'm on duty," end quote. She said Holtzclaw next asked for her ID. She got inside her car and retrieved her ID from her purse and gave it to the officer. Barksdale said she just squatted down beside her car, began crying uncontrollably, and yelled, quote, "Please, just stop." Holtzclaw bent down and told her, "If you tell anyone, I know where you live." He then returned to his patrol car and drove away. Barksdale said she got in her car and that all she could do was sit there and cry and thank God out loud that it was over. She then drove home, but was simply too scared to tell her boyfriend or anyone else until today. According to Detective Gregory's official report, it appears Barksdale admitted she learned about the case through an August 21, 2014 posting to Facebook by local news station KOCO Channel 5. In a link within that posting, Holtzclaw's face and name were published. Also, while the article skimmed over the allegation of several alleged victims, it did focus some on a, quote, 57-year-old grandmother who first came forward, end quote, and how she was fragile and terrified. Barksdale described Holtzclaw as having black hair and standing 5'6" to 5'7" and about 150 pounds. He was muscular with tan skin, possibly Mexican, and he was driving the newer model all-black patrol car. On the surface, this looks to be Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw's 8th victim. Much like the other accusers, Barksdale claims that Holtzclaw encountered her at night, and on a date Holtzclaw was indeed out patrolling. The encounter occurred on the northeast side of town and pulled her over on a bogus complaint. Holtzclaw made inappropriate comments, approached her from behind, fondled her breasts, her vagina, and even solicited sexual intercourse. Like so many of the other accusers, she protested, even pointed out that a female officer should be at the scene, yet ultimately she complied, or at least submitted to the sexual assault to avoid getting hurt or taken to jail. But is her story true? According to Detective Gregory's report, as he was interviewing Barksdale, he was simultaneously having OCPD Captain Ron Basie pull Officer Holtzclaw's patrol car AVL, or GPS, for March 12, 2014. Gregory steps out of the interview room to get an update from Captain Basie. Holtzclaw was working on the night of March 12th, but his patrol car GPS shows he was never at Northeast 50th and Lincoln, nor was he ever at Woodland Park. Detective Gregory returns to the interview room and, quote, "I then approached Shanice about problems with some of the details, and I had further questions. At that time, I was not advising Shanice she was not telling the truth, so I further investigated," end quote. Sensing Detective Gregory doubted her story, she offered to take a polygraph. Barksdale also started backpedaling on the date, since she now knows investigators can track Holtzclaw's movements and they are not matching up. She goes from absolutely certain to, quote, "kind of sure," end quote. Detective Gregory next points out how off her description is of Officer Holtzclaw. She then begins fidgeting and getting more nervous. She asks if she can leave.
Now Rocky Gregory
Detective
knows how to do
Gregory
his
then
job.
explains
suddenly.
to Barksdale that if she is indeed lying, it would hurt the overall case. He further tells her that she needs to come clean and he wouldn't arrest her at this time, but she would get herself into trouble if she continued forward with a false report. At that point, Shanice admitted it was all a lie. she had never been assaulted by Officer Holtzclaw. Detective Gregory noted, quote, "Shanice stated that those types of men don't get in trouble. She said she's seen the 57-year-old victim speak out and thought she didn't want that woman to be alone. Shanice admitted she made up the entire story," end quote. In fact, she admitted she had never even encountered Holtzclaw at any point. Detective Gregory next asked Barksdale to put her admission of false allegations in writing. He stepped out of the interview room again while she wrote the following, quote, "I felt sorry for the 57-year-old woman because of what he did to her. It was so sad, and I wanted him to go down for what he did. I am truly sorry. I feel bad for her, and I cried for a peaceful outcome on her behalf. Signed, Shanice Barksdale," end quote. The following is the actual recorded interrogation between Shanice Barksdale and Detective Rocky Gregory when he returned to the interview room.
All right. So to be clear, I'm going to run down through this. Officer Holtzclaw never even stopped you. Is that correct?
Am I in trouble?
Well, I gotta make sure here, okay? So he never touched you? Is it yes or no?
No. I never seen him.
Has any police officer ever touched you in an inappropriate manner? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. You know why I gotta ask you all these things, right? And explain to me again why you came in here. You signed this. This is your piece of paper. This is your story that you gave me, right? Why? And this is the story that you told. Why?
I just felt bad for her, and I just wanted to know, like, she wasn't the only victim or anything.
You felt bad for who?
The lady. She was so
What
old.
lady? I've got lots of ladies.
Well, I only know about the 57-year-old. That's the only one I know about.
And you found out about her from what?
The Facebook.
Okay.
KOCO5.
And you decided to do what?
Just write. Just do something on her behalf because I felt bad for her.
So
I wasn't trying to go to trial or anything. I just wanted to tell the story.
And you thought it would do what?
Made feel like she's not the only one. But I didn't know it was.
Rocky, she thought it would do the exact same thing you thought, piling on all these accusers whose stories have issues, who you didn't care about the issues there, but you did today with her, which is interesting with Miss Barksdale. So, but mainly I think she wanted to try to pile on because she felt like the more accusers, the more chance that Daniel would go down, which I think is a similar thought pattern that you and Kim Davis are having. So, but that's what occurs to me.
Others.
So you just made up the entire story?
Well, I did get put over in Woodland Park, but some of that, yeah.
Okay. But that was on a legit stop? But not with Officer Holtzclaw?
No.
Okay. But you lied on everything you said today? Yes or no?
Yeah.
You made up everything to try to help her out.
And I felt bad for her.
Well, you got yourself in a bind. Okay.
No, please. No, please. Please don't.
Look, I don't know. I'm going to have to pass this by the DA.
You do?
Of
course I do. Just like I told you, these victims,
What you say about?
we're trying to protect these victims.
I was trying to. Okay.
No, you were just coming here and you told lies. The truth, okay?
It's never bothered you. That hasn't bothered you so far, Rocky. When you found obvious discrepancies in the accuser's statements, hasn't mattered up till now. So, something that I find interesting here, folks, is that he is getting so fire and brimstone with her, basically, like where he's getting real serious and you're in a bind and everything. I believe this is all an exercise for Rocky. I believe Rocky wants to try to distance himself from people that might end up claiming in the future that he was maybe unethical, or that he just believed everything that these women said. By teeing off on Miss Barksdale and doing his job properly and sussing her out for what she was, a false accuser, and then he takes that and he gets that prosecuted. Eventually there are charges. They bring charges against her for this, right? And in doing all that, when people say, oh, well, are you sure about these girls' claims? He can say, yeah, I'm sure about these girls' claims, because you can tell by Miss Barksdale that, there was a difference in their claims. I think for him, this was just a tool for him to be able to argue that he wasn't just blindly following what these women were saying. Honestly, that's the way it strikes me. I could be wrong, but I'm probably right.
I mean, you're talking to the guy who arrested the guy, okay? Obviously, the police department's trying to do whatever it can, okay? We don't want this guy out here hurting our own citizens. I don't know why you didn't think, let him go down. It's not like we're trying to cover up everything. So you knew we arrested him. We had already come out and told everybody, this is what's going on. The public knows everything about it. I don't think you watched the news entirely, or you would have known a lot more.
I don't watch it.
I'll be honest with you, you're in trouble.
No, please.
But let's just see where it goes. I told you I wouldn't arrest you today. Okay?
What'd you say?
I said I wouldn't arrest you today. So he didn't stick his hand down your pants. He didn't touch your breasts. I'm out there trying to look for real victims, and now I gotta take time out and work on your lies.
You're out there trying to look for what, Rocky? With your little list? Yeah. Anyways, all right.
There's others out there that's real.
I didn't know it was a lie. I thought it was just that woman, because I felt bad for her. But she was so old.
If I didn't have to work on this case, okay, and try to track down real victims, because I've had to go to a lot of women stuff happened with, okay? They didn't come forward.
Who told you very similar
discrepancy
stories like this one? Anyway,
Okay.
sorry.
If I didn't have that real thing to do right now, I probably would arrest you. Okay? Because you're taking time out of a very important thing. It's already been out there. Okay? You should go and watch the news and see where things are at and how many victims. Okay?
I'm so sorry.
Well, you're probably getting ready to have to say you're sorry to a whole lot of women. It's taken everything they got to come forward. Everything. They didn't want to.
What's that, Rocky? What was that? It's taken everything they got to come forward? Really, Rocky? Because you are seeking them out according to a list you created, so they're not exactly coming forward. So, you're getting mad at her for lying. What about your lies? Right? What about your lies, Rocky?
And they don't know about the others either. The stuff happened to them. Just because of one jerk officer, okay?
No, two.
Out there doing
Rocky
stuff.
Gregory
That
and
doesn't
Kim
mean that
Davis.
there's a lot of us out here that don't care. And he ain't the first one I've arrested either.
Police
We don't want them. There's bad everywhere. There's bad pastors, there's bad doctors, lawyers, cops, firefighters, on and on and on. It doesn't matter. I mean, we all gotta, you gotta weed out the bad, keep the good.
And how did you get promoted to homicide detective?
All right, let's go.
You can watch and listen to the complete unedited video of Barksdale and Detective Gregory on this episode's homepage at holtzclawtrial.com or on my Bates Investigates YouTube channel. Though she was allowed to leave, it wasn't the last time she was going to have to answer for her lies. About 2 weeks later, on September 8th of 2014, Detective Gregory prepared and filed a probable cause affidavit seeking Barksdale to be charged with a crime. For whatever reason, the Oklahoma County DA's office waited 7 whole months before acting on that affidavit. In March of 2015, prosecutors filed 1 felony.
Folks, can we speculate a little bit about that? Why would the prosecutor's office wait 7 months to prosecute on that? Is it because they didn't want the public to know that false accusers were being found coming out? That might have tainted public opinion and made it less of a witch hunt? You know? People might have started putting down their pitchforks if they knew about that. Is that why it waited for 7 months? I think that's the most likely explanation for that, in my opinion. So, but yeah, very, very interesting.
Count of falsely reporting a crime against Barksdale. Just over a month later, the DA changed the criminal charge to a misdemeanor. Though Barksdale faced a criminal record, up to 90 days in jail and a $500 fine, on March 30th of 2016, almost a year later, she was allowed a plea deal in which she was sentenced to just probation, no jail, and a $100 fine. Just in case you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe this was her first offense, so she deserved a second chance. You'd be wrong. According to Detective Gregory's own notes, Barksdale's criminal history includes possession of marijuana, petty larceny, curfew violations, 2 larceny of merchandise cases, and a felony embezzlement by clerk case. All of that said, to me, the criminal charges and light sentence are not the most important aspects of this part of the investigation. So let's take a closer look. For one, this highlights something Detectives Davis and Gregory knew all along, and certainly knew would be the reality once they sought the arrest warrant for Holtzclaw. People would come forward in droves to claim they too were victims. I recall these comments by Davis and Gregory when they were interviewed by Michelle Mulkin for her documentary, Daniel in the Den, The Truth About the Daniel Holtzclaw Case.
After it hit the media, we really had to be kind of protective as far as just absolutely even just believing anything. We had to really kind of dissect, because now it was out there. Some people thought of money or just wanted attention or however.
So there are plenty of reasons to lie, including sort of...
Get out of trouble.
Yeah, and money, as you said, was a big factor for people. I mean, they wanted to cash in.
After they saw it on the TV, they were like, ooh, I can get in on this.
And this kind of case and these kind of allegations are sort of a magnet for people who are looking to cash in.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd argue the opportunity for people to begin lying, however, happened as soon as accuser Liggins decided, without the approval of detectives, to go public, just 5 days after her encounter with Officer Holtzclaw. And I'd also argue that lying is virtually being encouraged by detectives when they seek out women and tell them up front that they already think they are a victim, and then share what a really bad guy they think Holtzclaw is.
Yep.
It does exactly what Barksdale said she did. She lied because she thought there were real victims, and she simply wanted to give their allegations credibility. I'd also argue her past financial-based crimes also probably show she too would have been looking to file a lawsuit seeking monetary damages. Regardless.
And I would say that there's a good chance of that, folks,
detective...
because I remember her in there telling Rocky Gregory specifically, that she didn't want to do no court stuff or whatever. Like, she didn't, and which I don't believe, but I think the fact that she was thinking about that and worried that Rocky might have been thinking about that, and so she wanted to try to deny that as part of her motivation. But anyways, I think she tries to act like she isn't interested in that, but I think that's probably a big part of why she came forward. But it could just be because she wanted to show support for Janie Liggins. That's not out of the realm of possibility. So
Gregory handled this alleged accuser and exactly how he determined she was not credible. According to Gregory's September affidavit, he first became suspicious of Barksdale's story because of her description of Officer Daniel Holtzclaw.
Oh?
Quote, Barksdale described him as being 5'6" and 150 pounds, which is way off from his height and weight, end quote. That is true. However, an accuser's description not matching Holtzclaw has hardly ever been any concern in the past to Detectives Davis or Gregory.
Bingo!
Accuser Janie Liggins described her attacker as older than Holtzclaw by almost 20 years, short, with blonde hair, acne-scarred skin, and 40 pounds lighter than he actually is. Accuser Tabitha Barnes described him as having light brown hair and darker skin. She compared to Native American. Accuser Carla Johnson described her attacker as only 5'9", Daniel 6'2", and she, like the others, thought he was part Mexican or Native American. Accuser Carla Raines said her attacker was tanned, estimated his weight by 50 pounds less than he really is, and guessed his age to be a decade more than reality. Accuser Terry Morris described Holtzclaw as much older with dark skin, driving the older style black and white patrol car, and couldn't pick him out of a photo lineup. And how can we forget accuser Sherry Ellis? She described her attacker as a short, dark-skinned black male. In reality, 6 of the 7 current accusers that Detective Gregory did decide to believe all gave descriptions that varied either slightly or significantly from Daniel Holtzclaw. But Detective Gregory obviously didn't just rely on physical descriptions to determine credibility. He next noted in his affidavit that, quote, in checking the vehicle GPS for Officer Holtzclaw, he never was in those areas that night, end quote. That is true. Holtzclaw's patrol car GPS shows he never stopped at Northeast 50th or Woodland Park on March 12, 2014, even though he did work that night and those locations fall within his patrol area.
Those kind of discrepancies never mattered before.
Keep in mind, there was no GPS to compare to in the Liggins incident, and she too gave a description that doesn't match Holtzclaw. How did Detective Gregory determine that maybe Barksdale hadn't been assaulted while Holtzclaw was off duty when his GPS is disengaged? There is no mention in any file regarding Barksdale's allegations as to what time she claims the stop occurred. As we know, Terry Morris couldn't pick Holtzclaw out of a photo lineup based on his description, and she too initially claimed Holtzclaw attacked her in an area his patrol car GPS shows he was never in.
Yep.
Even the date she gave made the assault impossible. Yep. She also was uncooperative and even signed a waiver asking not to be involved. Yet, Detective Gregory never questioned her credibility. Accuser Ellis, the one who said her attacker was a short, dark-skinned, black male. She gave a specific location Holtzclaw's GPS pings prove he could not have driven to.
Yep.
And what about accuser Florine Mathis? She was adamant she was assaulted on either Northeast 17th or Northeast 18th and Kate, by the park. But detectives knew Holtzclaw had never stopped at any of those locations.
Say
But
what?
the discrepancies, both in physical description and location, never led detectives doubting the other 7 accusers, and they never even challenged those false assertions.
Right.
Not even when Holtzclaw was described as short and black. Trust me, we have 6 more accusers to go, and their descriptions and alleged locations are going to have major issues also, and those issues go unchallenged or even questioned by investigators. Finally, Detective Gregory mentions, quote, other discrepancies were made by suspect Barksdale as well, end quote. But he doesn't specify what those discrepancies were. One of the things I found interesting was the number of similarities between Barksdale's allegations and the other accusers. Things that were not in the news report she had seen on Facebook the day before. Like, the alleged assaults occurred at night, that Holtzclaw patted the women down and allegedly fondled them while standing behind them. And what really got my attention was Barksdale's claim that she openly challenged Holtzclaw by stating a female officer should be performing any search of her person. That same assertion was made by accusers Morris, Barnes, Johnson, and Raines, but wasn't yet disclosed publicly in news reports. So, what exactly did make Detective Gregory decide Shanice Barksdale was lying? And why didn't discrepancies in Barksdale's allegations not result in the same doubts with other victims he was of the opinion were telling the truth?
Right.
Unfortunately, Detective Gregory has never fully answered any of those questions. Regardless, there's 2 red flags in his official report that I want to point out, and I think one is further evidence that Detective Rocky Gregory is either a habitual liar or simply has no attention to detail, so his reports and testimony should always be highly scrutinized. For one, there is 0 mention of whether or not Detective Gregory ever sought to find out if Holtzclaw had indeed ever stopped Barksdale, or even ran her name through the police crime databases. In every single case, except accuser Liggins, investigators didn't even need Holtzclaw's GPS because he actually called in his contact with the individual to dispatch or ran them on his patrol car computer. So, it only stands to reason that Gregory would check to see who all ran Barksdale, but if he did, he never mentions it in any report. That said, I don't believe for a second that Detective Gregory wouldn't have looked to see if Holtzclaw had ever run Barksdale's name, if for no other reason than to see if maybe she's just getting her dates wrong. Keep in mind, virtually none of the accusers up to this point can pinpoint an exact date, and when they do, it often doesn't match Holtzclaw's patrol car GPS records.
Right.
Speaking of Holtzclaw's patrol car AVL or GPS, did you catch what Detective Gregory did that apparently would be very unique to Barksdale's interview? He clearly states in his report that as the interview was being conducted, he had Captain Basie simultaneously checking Holtzclaw's GPS records. Remember, that's why he steps out during his interview of Barksdale. I find it really odd. In every accuser's investigation, the detectives claim they sought patrol car AVL records after they had interviewed an accuser, often days later. In fact, during the criminal trial, detectives are questioned about when AVL records are sought. And over again, they claim it's never before or during their interviews with potential victims. It's always after. This from page 2220 of the jury trial transcript by Detective Rocky Gregory. Quote, "We didn't pull the AVL until after we had spoke with the victim and they had started to confirm maybe some of the things that had happened to them if they were indeed a victim. It wasn't until that time that we would check the AVL." End quote. Looking forward, I can tell you, we have 6 more accusers to go, and in every case, the AVL is allegedly not pulled until days later, and only after the interviews are complete, and sometimes the AVL varies greatly from their allegations. So why the change of procedure this time with this accuser? Or has that actually been the procedure all along, and Detective Gregory is simply denying it? Remember, back in episode 6 with accuser Terry Morris, nowhere in Detective Gregory's reports did he disclose he showed a map to Morris. In fact, when questioned at trial by Holtzclaw's defense attorney Scott Adams, Detective Gregory denied showing her a map when specifically asked. It wasn't until it became painfully clear that she was shown a map that Detective Gregory finally came clean and admitted that's exactly what he had done. He also admitted during the trial that he knew with 100% certainty that Morris lied during some of her courtroom testimony. Detectives also forwarded the fact accuser Florine Mathis was allegedly assaulted at Northeast 17th or Northeast 18th and Kate, even after they knew that was impossible. So lying appears to be of little concern to the detectives in this case.
Right.
This might also explain several of the meetings Detective Gregory had with accusers that were suspiciously not audio recorded, and no detailed notes or reports exist of those meetings. Were detectives going over maps, GPS coordinates, and other details to try and bolster accusers' allegations? While that may simply be my speculation, what is clear is that Detective Gregory himself claims he came to the conclusion that Barksdale was lying, simply because her physical description of him was off and Holtzclaw's patrol car GPS didn't match the date
None
she
of which has
provided.
mattered up till now.
Though it isn't stated in reports, I also have to assume he knew Holtzclaw had never run her through his computer. This is important because this is the bar that he has set on his own investigation. As long as he can show Holtzclaw had any contact whatsoever with an accuser, then in his mind, Holtzclaw must be guilty of anything they claim to be a victim of. That's a pretty low bar for credibility when you consider he and Detective Davis intentionally only sought out women whom Holtzclaw had previously contacted, and their descriptions and recollections of dates are often wrong.
Right.
And Barksdale won't be the last accuser that will eventually admit to lying. In fact, on the same day Barksdale was making her false allegations against Officer Holtzclaw, another woman, identified as Shakira Walker, also proclaimed to be a victim and did so on the local news. Here's a portion of that news story.
Good evening. As an Oklahoma City police officer sits behind bars accused of preying on women while on the job, people in his patrol area in Northeast OKC are reacting with both shock but also relief.
Daniel Holtzclaw faces 9 felony sex crimes charges. News 9's Steve Shaw is live at the Oklahoma City Police Department's Spring Lake Division tonight. Steve?
Kelly and Amanda, Daniel Holtzclaw has worked out of this precinct for the last 3 years. Investigators say there could be more victims, and when you hear what you're about to hear, there just may be. Last week, Shakira Walker lives a few blocks from one of the spots investigators allege Daniel Holtzclaw sexually assaulted one of his victims last March. Walker says she ran into Holtzclaw last week.
As I was walking to the house, he tried to grab me and make it seem like he was going to rape me.
Seriously?
No, I'm dead serious.
Was he in a police car?
Yeah, he was in a police suit in a police car.
And that's the guy? You've seen him on TV? Yeah. That is the guy?
Yeah, that's the guy.
Another red flag that popped up in Walker's allegations was also the undoing of other false accusers. Not only did Officer Holtzclaw never have contact with Walker, but she claimed the assault happened just days earlier.
Right.
And, as we know, Holtzclaw at this point had been on administrative leave for over 2 months. And it's not just false accusers coming forward. It's also people indirectly involved in the case that are now revising their previous stories, lying to bolster the credibility of friends and family who have made allegations. Remember accuser Terry Morris from episodes 5 and 6, and how her former boyfriend, Christopher Shelton, called police on her because she was tearing up his vehicle, because she was upset that he had left her for another woman?
Right.
Well, he's giving a different story now that the story is all over the news. Here's a clip of what he told KOCO News Channel 5 just 2 days after Daniel Holtzclaw is arrested.
She didn't want to call it because she was fear of retaliation.
Living in fear of those whose job it is to serve and protect. Tonight we're learning more about the police officer accused of sexually assaulting 7 women. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Morgan Chesky. Tonight Daniel Holtzclaw is in Oklahoma County Jail, and investigators say from February to June the officer preyed on women he pulled over. KOCO's Dave Detling live tonight on the northeast side with the story of one of those encounters. Dave.
Hey, good evening, Morgan. Well, behind me, the gas station where police interviewed one of the women involved in this assault investigation. Tonight, we are hearing from that victim's friend who dialed 911.
I told them that I had a victim up here of rape.
Christopher Shelton remembers the night he called 911 after seeing his female friend walking near Northeast 23rd Street in Kelly.
We've heard his clip. We've heard his 911 call.
And upset.
He is lying.
In the car, she just busted out crying.
He says it was about an incident with an officer, later identified as Daniel Holtzclaw.
He said, "Oh no, they're not going to do anything." I said, "You must try."
Shelton's friend is one of 7 victims who've come forward in the case against this Oklahoma City police officer. Shelton says the allegations are a wake-up call for the Northeast side. He says he'll be watching the investigation closely while praying for the victims.
They're human. So even though they're an authoritative figure, you're going to have to expect that there are some bad ones. You know, not all of us are perfect.
And tonight, Holtzclaw remains locked up in the county jail on a $5 million bond. And the chief of police for Oklahoma City PD saying they are working very hard to restore the public's trust. We're on the northeast side. Dave Detling, KOCO 5 News.
The case into Terry Morris's allegations began in an early morning 911 call on May 24, 2014. The call was placed by 61-year-old Oklahoma City resident Christopher Shelton, a recent and former boyfriend of 43-year-old accuser Terry Morris.
Oklahoma City 911, what's your emergency? Hello? Hello? Hello?
I feel like a motherfucker and ripped my heart out and tried to put it back inside. I feel like
Hello?
Can you
hear me?
Yes, sir.
Where are you?
I'm on 23rd in Kelly.
Okay, you at a house or are you at the intersection?
I'm at the Valero on 23rd in Kelly.
What's going on there, sir?
I see a friend of mine. She was walking down Kelly side, falling in the street, so I gave her a ride. I was going to take her home to a grandmama's house, but she wouldn't get out, so she told me to take her on 23rd. And I've been trying to get her out for the last 30 minutes, and now she's saying...
Okay, are you in the Valero?
Pardon?
You at the Valero, is that right?
Yes, sir.
What kind of car are you in, sir?
I'm in a 1992 Accuser Legend.
What color?
It is tan. She's tearing the inside of my car up. She's drunk.
What's your name, sir?
My name's Christopher Shelton. Christopher Shelton. Yeah, she's yanking stuff out of my car.
What's her name, sir?
Her name's Terry Lynn Morris.
She white, black, Hispanic, or Indian?
She's black.
How old is she?
She's tearing my car up.
I understand.
She's 43.
Okay, she's still in the car?
Well, she finally got out, man. She's throwing stuff at me. Police. I told you I was there. Why you been getting up? She's hitting on me and everything.
She drunk or on drugs?
Oh, my purse.
Christopher, is she drunk or on drugs?
Yeah, there's something wrong with her. I just want somebody to come get her. I don't hit women or anything.
What color shirt and pants you wearing?
She got a black dress on.
Look like she needs
I was trying to help her, but then she's throwing my darn CDs out.
Yes, sir. Look like she, or does she have any weapons?
No, she just throwing my darn car up.
The officer's already driving to you.
Yeah.
Look like she need an ambulance.
She just tore my stereo apart.
Are you trying to help me?
They're on their way here, Terry.
Yeah,
You done tore up my darn.
So you can call the people, the same motherfuckers that raped me. I don't know the police.
Could you hurry up here, sir?
Sir, I'm not driving. The officer's driving.
When they
Okay?
do call, let me describe the police that raped me the other night.
Yeah, you should see them very close, very soon.
She just tore my radio out.
Because our friend.
Let me know when you see the officer.
Oh, yeah, I'm shutting the door. She's up here tearing my stuff up.
Do you see the officer?
Here he is. Do I need to stay on the phone?
Did the officer find you?
Yeah, here they are.
All right, talk to them, okay?
Yes. All right, thank you.
That 911 call is exclusive to this podcast. I obtained it through a Freedom of Information request. Amazingly, it was not part of the discovery in this case and was never presented at trial.
Alrighty, so I went and grabbed this audio clip so that people could understand that people's attitudes and opinions and things like that will change as it has here. Because you heard what Mr. Shelton was saying in the press, obviously when he was getting on the press and getting to be on TV, and you hear him and what he's talking there. How, I just told her she should do something about it. He called 911 because she was tearing up his vehicle. You guys heard it. She was tearing up his vehicle. He was desperate to get rid of her, and he couldn't get rid of her. And now she was tearing up his vehicle, and this is why he was calling 911. I mean, that's obvious in the call. And so it's just to hear him on the news saying that, knowing what we know from that 911 call, it just shows how not just the victims, but even people connected to the victims get affected by this. And we know Mr. Shelton perjured himself on the news because we clearly see in that 911 call, the reason he's calling is because she is tearing up his shit.
Shelton now claims he called police to report Morris's rape and that he encouraged her to come forward. That's not at all how it happened, and you heard Shelton's 911 call here exclusively on this podcast. In reality, as noted in Detective Gregory's official investigative report, when Morris told Shelton she had been raped by a police officer, it was as she was cussing at him for leaving her for another woman. Shelton told Detective Gregory he told Morris to be quiet and that he didn't want to hear about it because he didn't believe her. Shelton only dialed 911 because Morris wouldn't get out of his car and she was literally tearing it up. That was the sole reason that he told the dispatcher that he was requesting police assistance. Right. And the lies, they get even more outrageous. Not only did women in Oklahoma City's northeast side come forward, but so did at least one man. According to Detective Gregory's case file, 59-year-old Southeast Oklahoma City resident Terry Roy Dunn Sr. claimed that he too had been sexually assaulted by Officer Holtzclaw. And the date? October 31st, 2014. That's over 4 months after Officer Holtzclaw had been placed on administrative leave, and 2 months after he had been arrested. According to Dunn, at around 8 a.m., he was at the 7-Eleven at Southeast 44th and Shields in his car. That's when he said 2 or 3 patrol cars showed up and he was detained. Dunn claimed that it was Officer Holtzclaw that searched him 3 different times during that stop, and that each time Holtzclaw used his hand to rub Dunn's penis on the outside of his clothing. Dunn even described Holtzclaw as 5'9" to 5'10", white male, muscular, with short hair. Dunn said that he was certain it was Officer Daniel Holtzclaw. However, according to Detective Gregory, When Dunn was confronted with the fact it couldn't have been Holtzclaw, Dunn, quote, didn't know what to say, end quote. Instead of arresting Dunn for making a false allegation, he was instead allowed to sign a refusal to prosecute form, where he wrote down that he was now declining to pursue charges because he was just trying to, quote, help OCPD and the other victims, end quote. In an upcoming...
Whoa, am I understanding that correctly? So Rocky Gregory only goes after women who do that? That's very interesting. He lets the man who makes a false accusation slide, but puts the screws to the woman that he determines made a false accusation. I find that very, very interesting.
Episode, another false accuser will eventually be given $25,000 by the city of Oklahoma City based on allegations against Officer Holtzclaw. But those stories and more are for future episodes. If you'd like to see photos of false accusers Barksdale, Walker, Dunn, and more, check out the episode 18 highlights on our Instagram profile at Holtzclaw Trial. If you want to watch the unedited video of Barksdale's interview with Detective Gregory and read all of the investigative reports and more, check out this episode's homepage at holtzclawtrial.com.
Alrighty, folks. So that wraps up, these couple of things here. That was 2 episodes of the podcast. So we see Daniel's arrest, we see the bond, we see all those things that are going on, and it clearly seems there was an atmosphere in the air. You know what I mean? For them to set an impossible bond like that was unprecedented at all. I mean, seriously, everybody being asked about this is like, oh no, I've never heard anything like that before. So that tells you something unique was happening. You know what I mean? And I think it's that something unique that was happening that was causing all this craziness that we're seeing, this stupidness. This investigation, I swear, is stupid. It's so stupid. It's like, what did they think was going to happen if they went into the asking the women Daniel had contact with in his course of doing his job, and of course women that he's searched or even maybe arrested or taken in on felony warrants or things like that they're not going to be too happy with him about, right? Or as you saw today with the lady that came in and falsely confessed. As you saw with her, it was basically, she was claiming it was just sympathy for Janie Liggins, she said, the older lady, but she was basically saying she was doing it out of sympathy for her. So I mean, you add the fact that they're pulling at these women's heartstrings, and these women are obviously savvy enough to know that a lawsuit against the police officer would likely result in a civil suit where they could get some money. And so of course they did what they did. And the detectives here are just ridiculous. And the way we see Rocky here today, where he has shown none of that attention to detail with any other interview until this one with this young lady that he, ended up filing charges against. Where was that tenacity before now? That's why I think it's feigned. I think it's fake. I think it's all for show. It's just the way it strikes me. The way that Rocky's acting about it, the way he's, conducting himself. It just strikes me that way, that it's all a show. He wants to be able to say later, no, I was very critical of these ladies. Look in fact, I even prosecuted one person who I felt their accusations were false, right? Almost like it's a shield for him, a cover. That's, you know what I mean? That's what it seems like, right? So that's what I'm pointing at. Anyway. So you see, as we go on, you just continue to see very, very, very concerning things in this investigation. And we haven't even gotten to the prosecution yet. you know. I guess we're kind of starting to get onto that, touching on that with setting bond, but right now it's just the investigation, the two investigators, and all the mistakes they are making, you see. And then we'll get obviously to the trial, and we'll see the, you know, things like the prosecutor lying to the jury in closing arguments. Shouldn't be allowed. But I'll be getting my hands on the transcripts eventually here, and I'm going to be reading that, and I'm going to see, you know, was there an objection to it? I mean, was there anything at all going on there that to oppose the prosecutor telling that lie on the stand? So anyway, that's what I'm looking to look into. So anyways, that wraps up this one, folks. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.